We hope. Welcome to another episode of Many Such Cases.
Many Such Cases is a podcast where we have conversations about the communities, cultures, and economies that are emerging on FarCaster.
Live. Woo! We are back and better than ever. Well, speaking for myself.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm good too. Okay. So this is our first episode since FarCon happened, or at least I should say my first episode. I
don't know if anyone saw. I had a guest appearance on Doing Number.
I have to say my experience of it was that it was incredible. It was amazing to see you work and to perform at the level that you did. I was already so impressed with you, Ted, but seeing that just like you went above and beyond in a way that I think blew everyone's mind. So yeah, maybe we could just start off this episode with me interviewing you and asking you kind of what your experience was like and how it went for you.
Yeah, let's do it. Also, thank you so much because there were a lot of moments where you got the up close and real look at how much I was just grinding and struggling in some ways, and you were always a light of inspiration and motivation and gave the best advice. So thank you, because I couldn't have done it without you. And also my mom and my sister adore you, having met you. So thank you.
Oh man, I felt so bad, like just seeing them work too. Like they were just grinding, you know, up late every night, up early in the morning, and doing everything, coordinating with other people, like just moving chairs, like, you know, water, like I mean, the labor of love from you and your family was on full display. And I think it was incredible. It was inspiring. It was just like really, really impressive.
Thank you. I think you're the same way. We're really lucky in that my family is very much family above all else. And growing up, my parents always instilled those values in us. Is like, no matter how things are going, no matter if you're fighting, if you're feuding, if like you're upset with one another, like you just always show up. The most important thing that we have is each other. Even when I asked them to come out and I was like, oh, you only have to be here on Wednesday and Thursday, they were like, no, we're going to help you the entire time. And even when I was like, guys, like, go home, you don't have to do this, my mom was literally like, I will be more upset if you make me go home right now than if you just let me stay here and help clean up trash. And I think that's just like who we are. And a lot of people were like, how do you work this hard? Or like, how could you do this? And I was like, I genuinely don't know any other way. Like, that's just who my family is. And I realized how lucky I am for that. And even my mom and my sister, like, they took so much pride in the fact that they could be there and help me. And it was also fun to see them just like operate on a completely other level. So anyways, thank you. Yeah. Don't feel bad. We went back and my dad was like, I can't believe that you didn't ask me to help too. Like my dad like took it as a dig that he wasn't there. So yeah.
So from your experience, like what went well, and what were, say, some of your favorite moments?
What went well is that I think people had a good time. And I was really nervous about that. Like, a good event is an event that makes people feel good and makes them happy and has them leaving and be like, that was so much fun. I can't wait for it again. And I would say that a testament to how good it made people feel was how everyone afterwards was like, when's the next one? So I feel like that was a success. My favorite moment, I've thought a lot about this because I was like, oh, there are so many favorite moments. One of them was just on Saturday night. For those who are listening, basically the FarCon team did like Wednesday night, all day Thursday, all day Friday, and then Saturday, Ryan McMahill, I really don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he's the genius behind Slow Rodeo, helped mastermind like all of Saturday and pretty much the visionary for Saturday night's epic airplane mode party. And so it was so fun that night to be with my mom and my sister and to like look around and be able to congratulate Ryan and be like, holy crap, like we did it in a way. Like there was only one day left. That to me was so fun. And like we're all there in our puffer jackets, just like finally getting to like bounce to music. That was amazing. And then my other favorite moment was during the hackathon closing. There's like two good moments from this. Is when the meme caster guy was presenting his memes, I just was lock-eyed watching you as the meme lord. And I was like, if Johnny likes this, this is gonna win. Like, I was just watching you. And I have a video of like me zooming in on your face. And I
That's
could see
hilarious.
you first skeptical, being like, where is this going? And as he presented it out, you get like this big smile on your face and you like start to nod. And I was like,
That's hilarious.
amazing. And then the other moment was in between presentations and the hackathon. I was like, also, huge shout out to Dylan, who's really just taken the lead and helped make this come to life. And the audience started chanting Dylan. They were like, Dylan, Dylan. And he is so humble and so down to earth. And he like did not know what to do. And the audience saw this and kept going, Dylan, Dylan. And we couldn't get it to stop. And so like that for me was just such a highlight because Dylan is the best. Dylan and I are like ride or dies for life now. And for him to get credit and then also to just experience that like collective euphoria and celebration for him was maybe, yeah, those are like my top 3 moments from
That's
FarCon.
so rad. That's awesome. Okay, what about lowest moments?
Oh. Oh my gosh. Where do I start? Just so everyone knows, like, again, I loved FarCon. It was not without its lows. If Erica Heavyweight is listening, she can relate to this too. Is Thursday, the summit day, I had a breakdown. Like, I full on cried uncontrollably. The next day, my sister had a breakdown. And then the next day, my mom.
Oh no.
It was like consecutive. I think it was just like lack of sleep and just overwhelming. The other thing that I would say was like my actual low point was on Wednesday, the venue's elevator broke in the morning. So all of the load in of everything, we could not use the elevator, which we were promised. So that means all that furniture, all the AV, everything had to be carried upstairs. And so this was like taking way, way longer. And everyone was like frustrated. I don't know if people know this, but like my family and I were like we physically were doing like physical labor to move things. So, and then it's the welcome mixer. And so we have to pop away. Like my mom and my sister are bussing the welcome mixer. I have to be there to like say hi, help bus. And I leave the venue, the main venue, being like, okay, this is how it's going to work. Here's FarCon shop. Here's everything, etc. We come back at 11 p.m. to the main venue, and the FarCon shop area, oh my God. I guess there was like some issue going on, and I wasn't there to like talk about it. Things were moved around, and I literally almost lost it. I like actually did lose my cool. I was like, what is going on? And why did you move this without talking to me? It looks so bad. I was like, I cannot have people walking into this room and this be the experience. And so ultimately it was just like, we have to move things, everybody. Like, we're moving all of this. And like, we spent the next hours moving it around for it to like look good again. And it was worth it. But like, when you're at 11 p.m., I was so angry. I was so angry. And that was like one of the low points for me because I don't know. I just like didn't want to deal with that. So yeah.
Wow.
Low point.
Okay. What would you do differently if you were to do it again? And maybe we can talk about that as well.
So related, I would have hired a full events team. Like we would have hired like a full event coordination team. You didn't think you'd need one for a 150 person event and like what we initially had planned. But yeah, I think I would have raised the ticket prices because you guys got 4 nights of open bars for like, and everything else for like $200. So I would have definitely proactively hired like a real event coordination team instead of like just my mom and my sister. That's what I would have done differently. And then as a result, I think I would have actually gotten to experience like we were chatting about this, like I didn't get to hang out with that many people. I didn't go to a single dinner that I was invited to because like we needed to make the experience good for everyone else. And so I think that would have helped like, if we had an events team, I would have gotten to enjoy it. Sounds weird to say, but yeah.
I remember going to the Bright Moments event in Argentina and seeing kind of how they ran the show, and they had a big events team, and even then they were very busy. You know, they had a ton of stuff going on. And I remember just like thinking the same thing. I was like, damn, like I feel really bad for Ted because there was so much, you know, build up And it's so exciting to see everybody together. I think you mentioned this somewhere where you're like, yeah, I didn't get to actually go to FarCon. You were there and you were kind of running it, but you didn't get to enjoy it in the same way that everybody else did, which is it's sad because it's like you were the one that did more work than anybody else. So yeah, I think an events team would have been for sure clutch. And then even then it probably would have still been a ton of work. But I also think like that speaks to just how you've adapted. I remember months ago when you were like, maybe 6 months ago, you were like, hey, I think I might do FarCon. Like you were asking about like crowdfunding stuff because there was a crowdfund for the first one. And it was like going to be super small. It was going to be, 100 people, 200 people, whatever. And the network went through these massive growth spurts during the planning process, and you just adapted. And in a lot of ways, you didn't have the advantage of like knowing what it was going to be beforehand. It kind of revealed itself to you. And so as the primary kind of point person and planner, like you had to adapt, and you did. And I think given how many variables there were and how many moving pieces there were, I think you did like just an exceptional job. And I don't know anybody else who would have been able to pull it off like that, like I think without you, it could have very easily, I know your fear was, I don't want it to be the Fire Festival. I think with anybody else running it, it probably would have been.
Thank you.
So yeah, my experience was just like, it was incredible. I think you did a phenomenal job. I think the team did a phenomenal job. It was, it was a ton of fun. I would say it was a lot. I remember like Saturday morning, I had like a major crash. Like there was and the other thing is like, there's so many people who I just really wanted to even get like 5 or 10 minutes to connect with, but there were like literally hundreds. And so I just felt like I was like, almost like a politician. Like I was like working every room that I was in. I was like trying to work the room because I didn't want to go home and be like, oh, I never talked to this person and this person, this person. Like my natural instinct is to like find someone and just talk to them for like 2 hours and not really talk to anybody else.
Same.
And so it's like, it was just like doing that over a number of days. It's just like by the time I got home, my wife was like, how'd it go? And I was like, it was good. I can't tell you any more than that.
That's so funny.
Yeah, it was just exhausting.
You triggered a memory. I know that once frames came out later, there was like this astronomical interest in our applications went through the roof. But do you remember we did do the first crowdfund, and I was like, okay, we should probably do like, let's say 1.5 ETH or something. Right. I forget. We need like $1,000. You guys, our crowdfi sold out in literally like a day, like less than a day. So much so that Johnny and I hopped on like a Google Meet at like 10 p.m. or 9 p.m. that night to spin up another one. And I remember being like, okay, Johnny is a real one because it's like 9 p.m. at night and he is helping me. No real reason other than the fact that I was using your product. And I was like, oh, can you walk me through this? We found the custom color and the custom colors to match the FarCon stuff. Like it was so fun. And then we're there and it ended up being like, I think one of the most
the biggest
engaging
one we had. Yeah, for sure. By a lot.
Wow.
And it happened. That just speaks to like how the scale of it changed and kept changing. It was kind of like, oh, we just thought we'd do this for a couple grand, and then that sold out instantly. And then it was like, oh, okay, well, maybe we could get a slightly nicer venue. And then it just kept getting bigger and bigger, and more days were added, and it just kept, scaling. And to do what you did, I don't think it'll happen again, because it's just a very dynamic situation that we're all in, that you were in. And I think like just to handle it and to pull it off like that is so impressive. So
thank you.
I think everybody saw that. I think everybody could see like, wow, you're really making it happen in a way that I think a lot of people would have just sort of like thrown up their hands and just been like, okay, I'm fucking done because this is too much. So
thank you. There was a trade-off in terms of keeping it smaller. Like we were pushing capacity. I think like even when I was like, we're at capacity, it was 200, but it was supposed to be 150. A lot of the people who initially got passes were like OGs and like early farcaster, like the faristocracy, as people love to say. And I'm personally like an intimate person. Like I'd rather a smaller gathering. I'm like you. Like, I'd rather have like less people, but spend more time with each person. But also at the same time, there was this narrative going on that FarCaster was exclusive. And for me personally, I was like, I don't want FarCon to contribute to that narrative. And even if we still have to make it application based or we can't let everyone in, I would rather just scale it up and figure out a way to make it work so that everyone can experience this. And then also because I fundamentally believe that like experiences are like that's what matters most in the world. And having like a 5 day experience where you get to hang out with other farcasters. For me, what's so special is going around, running through the courtyard, like picking up trash and like looking around. I could see that there's like people that are really close friends to me meeting new farcasters. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I wouldn't have necessarily said that they would like find each other and then to see it happen repeatedly. And then now, 2 weeks later, to be going through my feed and seeing them tagging each other in posts and continuing that friendship that they formed then makes me think like, oh, this is a person that wouldn't have been part of that like 150 intimate group, but is now finding their footing and like found a good group of friends or like building their tribe as a result of being at FarCon. And that to me makes it all worth it. Even, you know, people can talk about the trade-offs and like, oh, they would have preferred a smaller event. Like, yeah, me too. But like, I think that this was the right call for FarCon and for Farcaster generally. So, yeah.
One of my favorite moments was this just kept happening over and over, like all day, every day. It happened with me, and I watched it happen with other people as well, is that you'd see two people be like, hey, what's up? You know, I'm so-and-so. And they'd be like, cool. And then they would kind of like look at each other's badge, or they'd like hold each other's badge up, which had the PFPs. And then they'd be like, oh,
Yeah.
you're so. And then like there'd be this like whole moment.
Yeah.
And then they'd like give each other a hug, you know? And so it's like, that happens so many times. Like, and I would like facilitate it. Like I saw that someone like John from Automod, he was like, hey, what's up? I'm John. And then like, someone, oh, what's up? I'm blah. And then I would just point at him and go, Automod. And then
You
go,
did that to me and him.
yeah, it happened so many times. I just loved those moments. And someone, I don't know who said this, but they were like, what other, like when else in life does such a moment happen? You know, it's like hard to think of. Like, it's such a unique moment to be like, okay, this is somebody who I've talked to and have like established a real relationship with on the internet. But like, I don't know what they've looked like. I've never seen them in person. I've never hung out. And then you just feel this immediate connection, like this immediate real connection with them once you kind of like map, like once you like register, like, oh, you're that person from the internet. And I just like loved that. I loved seeing that happen over and over. And then it would deepen over the few days. So there was like, you know, there's a bunch of people who you're like, you'd have that moment with, and then you'd see them again the next day, and then you'd have lunch with them or dinner with them, and then the day after. And then you left being like, damn, these are like real friends now. Like I feel like a connection to them that I just didn't feel beforehand. And to me, that's the spirit of FarCon, you know, like that's like the apex experience that I think you helped create. You know, we wouldn't be able to do that without you. So I think like doing more of that, whether that's as part of, you know, one big monolithic FarCon every year, or many small FarCons, or maybe not even FarCon at all. Maybe there's just, I don't know, satellite events, dinners, whatever. But that moment and those, you know, kind of facilitating those more often, I think is like really, really special.
Thank you. Yeah, me too. You actually did that to John and I. Because I only know him as JTGI. So I came up to and you guys were chatting and he's like, hey, I'm John. And I was like, hey. And I was like, I don't know who this person is. And then you're like, Automod, JTGI. And I was like,
yeah, I just started doing that with everybody. Like more and more, I would just like point to them and like name their project. And then that would like kick it off, you know?
And my only thing I would say is like, damn, I wish that there was a way where you could give somebody, maybe I should talk to Euler Lagrange about this. Is like, I wish I could give people, I wish people with non-human PFPs could give me access to look at their actual face, like a photo of their actual face. Because I'm like so good with facial recognition that I'm like, I can't remember I can't remember what your username is, but if I saw your face, I would know exactly who you are. And now I like, there's no way for me to do that. Somebody gave me these amazing cookies and I remember what their face looks like, but I can't remember their username. And now I'm like, shoot. So I wish there's like some way to do like more humanhood in a way. And I think a lot of people realize that too, is like, oh, we love the magic But I wouldn't be surprised if like people start updating some of their PFPs or like start posting more photos of themselves as a result, because it's hard. And like, I want relationships with people. I don't want relationships with cartoons. Sorry.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, there. Well, I think it's also too just like, human beings are like three-dimensional and like PFPs are not. And so it's hard to fill in the gaps like on so yeah, I don't know. I think it was awesome. It was amazing.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so let's see. What
Thank you.
yeah.
Well,
Do you want to
um,
talk? Yeah,
about
go
what?
ahead. Well,
What do
there's this question and there was a little bit of, I don't know, maybe
Oh,
we say
let's talk
drama.
about
Yeah,
this.
okay,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. This actually really bummed me out. And I will be honest, is the whole point of Farcaster and FarCon is to bring people together. And so after FarCon, and like again, a testament to the success of it was like so many people were like, let's do it next year, let's do it next year. And our team was getting like inundated with like requests of like, hey, can we do it next year? Who we can do it next year? Like asking us for permission. And we're like, okay, if FarCon is decentralized and permissionless, no one should be asking us for permission. And like we shouldn't be the ones to say yes or no. And so Graham McBain put together this cast that we like all pretty much agreed on, the core organizers who really contributed to 2024, and like put it out there that said, hey, like we're releasing it back. It was so fun. We can't wait to see what you do with that. And implicitly, we were all like, of course, we're going to help support in whatever ways that we can. And like had already chatted with multiple people who asked us about it that like, yeah, we're going to help them out. Like, of course, we'd give you advice and help shepherd it along. There was just like multiple cities who wanted to do it next year. So we're like, okay, great. Like, it's yours. We can help, whatever. Wow. If you want to talk about the delta between like euphoria and feeling bummed out, like that was the ultimate cast to do it. And that then like New York came out and New York did it, then Tokyo, then they're fighting with each other, then somebody says something about a civil war, and then everyone's opinionated, and like it just bummed me the F out because I was like, everyone's meaning well. I felt like our hands were completely tied. Like, I didn't want to comment on anything personally because then if we're like, oh, we think it should be this, X, Y, and Z, then it's like, oh, you're centralized entity, because also behind the scenes there was pressure that people didn't want us to do it again because that would be counter to it being a decentralized movement. And so it was just like this really uncomfortable situation in which then Grin and Cameron then got involved and made the public statements and somewhat implied that like we were like wiping our hands clean of it, which wasn't the intention at all. Like anybody who just saw how much effort we put into it knows that we would support anything related to it. And so it just ended up becoming this like ugly 2-day bummer that thank God I was in Paris for, because I couldn't really be online that much. And of course it blew over, but I just felt really bad for everyone who was involved and who had their feelings hurt, or who felt like, wow, like why am I not being supported about this idea that I want to be doing? Because that's a bummer. So all that to say is the internet has a 5-second memory, and like in terms of next year or in terms of the next one, that's up to the community to decide really. And at the end of the day, people will show up to an event that they trust, will execute, and whatever organizing crew is doing it. And there's different things for different people, and that's ultimately what will happen. Like people who didn't want to come to FarCon this year didn't come to FarCon, and people who like thought we would do a good job showed up, and like that will always happen. So I think it's too early to say anything, but my key takeaway was I loved doing this, grinding through it as hard as it was, and I want to be doing more of these types of experiences where we're bringing together the Farcaster ecosystem in a meaningful way. So, yeah.
Do you have anything that you'd like to see happen for next year as far as people, location, structure, any, just like, or words of advice or inspiration that you'd want to put out there? It's okay if you don't. I'm just curious.
I think authenticity is king, and I will always say this, is like just be authentic. Like throughout the entire process, we were authentic. We might have made some missteps, but at the end of the day, we always tried to be authentic and think about what Farcaster community wanted, and often asked a lot of the time. And that is really the number one thing if you want it to be successful. Also, just do a hackathon with it and make sure that everybody sees the hackathon finalists, because that to me was one of the best parts. So those are my two pieces of advice. Thank you.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. As an observer and as an attendee, I think that actually to both FarCon 1 and 2, I don't think that the role of the leader can be overstated. Like, I think that the reason why FarCon 1 happened is because Cameron and Grin made it happen. They took the risk, they took the initiative, they put themselves in that role and then executed. And I think you kind of carried that torch and took it onto an entirely, but it was like you did that. You know, it wasn't a community. It wasn't like a democracy. It was like you made it happen. You're the one showing up to the venue at 11 o'clock at night saying, this isn't good enough. We need to make it better. Like, that is the role of the leader. And in order for it to go well, whoever does it or whatever happens next, I do think that like there needs to be somebody who takes the torch and says, I'm going to lead this thing. I'm going to take us to Valhalla and you should follow me and you should believe in me. And so they're able to not only execute on the opportunity, but they're able to convince other people that they can, which is, I think, what you're saying. If you have the faith that they will, then you'll go. And if you don't, then you won't. I think that's like key. And it takes time. I mean, you had been working on FarCon for many, many months before it had actually happened. So I think like building the consensus, building the trust, building the vision, all of that just requires a lot of effort, and it's thankless. People don't, it's not like you're getting paid. It's not like, I mean, this is it's like a pure labor of love. So I think it takes a special person, I think, to want to take that on. So I'm excited for what happens, but who knows, maybe there won't be one, maybe there'll be many, maybe it'll decentralize in the way that like hubs are decentralized or something. I don't know. That would be kind of cool too.
Yeah. But I will say, kind of like moving on from FarCon, yes and no, is because I was so in the weeds and then went straight to France for my brother's tournament, I missed a lot of things online. I felt like I was living under a hole, or living under a rock. Colloquial phrases, not my strength. But there was this cast and tweet heard around the world that I believe has sparked a lot of conversation everywhere. And it's OX Designers cast and tweet that says that he was leaving FarCon more bearish on FarCaster, saying the protocol wants to compete and win at the client level. Clients want to win and avoid being dependent on the protocol. All roads lead to winner take all. So what's the point? I'm going to ask you, now we're switching, I will be kind of interviewing you, can you ELI 5 this to me? Can you like explain what he's saying? Because it introduced more questions to me than like an actual light bulb moment of like, oh yeah, I get what he's saying. And I welcome any contrarian takes. But my first two things as we're talking through this, if you can include this in your answers, like, aren't like all clients dependent on protocols? Like, isn't that how this works? And then second is like, this winner takes all phrase is assuming like a very Web 2 mentality, when in my mind, the framework that I use as a default is like, no. Like Web 3 is like, it's collaborative capitalism in a way that a lot of my Web 2 friends, they're the ones that make this argument to me, not me to them, if that makes sense. Like, they think about it in pure capitalism, winner takes all is the best possible outcome, whereas my mental framework is rising tide lifts all ships. It's positive sum. Like, yes, you might have a large piece of the cake, but like the cake itself is getting bigger too. And so it just confused me. And so can you explain this cast to me?
Sure. I've been thinking a lot about it. I was like up late last night, like digging through the replies, and Dan chimed in and had some interesting things to say. And I think a lot of people were talking about this at FarCon. And I think to me, it comes down to really two things, which is leverage and dependency. So what I mean by leverage is, let's say that a client came in and built on top of the FarCaster protocol, but just rapidly eclipsed Warpcast in terms of their daily active usage. So one kind of out there thought experiment might be, well, first of all, putting the kind of really hard computer science problems aside, let's just say theoretically that Elon says, we're going to build X on top of the farcaster protocol. Makes a lot of sense because that would offload a lot of their, pretty much all their infrastructure costs to hubs.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say the tech was there and they did that.
RIP hubs if that happened.
Yeah. So no, there needs to be
Warpcast is down.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah. So they need major breakthroughs for such an event to happen without like, enormous failure. But like, let's just say that happened. Well, so now who has the leverage in terms of what happens with the protocol? Like, I mean, I would argue that X does. X has all the users. They're going to, if they want something or don't want something in the protocol, odds are they're going to get what they want. The inverse of this is dependency. If you don't have leverage, you have dependency. So, for example, a much smaller example of this would be people have asked us, who do you guys use as your indexer? And we're like, well, we wrote our own indexer. And they're like, you wrote your own indexer. Why would you do that? And it's like, well, because we need things. It needs to do things. And all of the available options didn't do those things. And if they did 90% of them, now we're in this really low leverage position of having to ask the creators of this thing for it to do what we want. But it's critical to our business. We can't, we're not going to put ourselves in this situation. We have to be the masters of our own destiny by saying, no, we have these requirements. We're not going to ask somebody to implement those. We're going to just build it ourselves. So this is like central to like build versus buy question. And so to me, like, all businesses want leverage and not dependencies. And so an analogy might be like looking at the relationship between Apple and Google in the early days of the iPhone. So you had this, in my opinion, it was like this perfect symbiotic relationship between hardware and software companies. Like Apple was doing what is very good at doing, which is building phenomenal hardware and like OS software. And then you had Google doing what it was phenomenal at doing, which is making services. So, YouTube, Maps, a lot like search, a lot of the web services that were on the early iPhone were all driven by Google. And that was mutually beneficial, right? Like the software experiences improved massively because of what Google brings to the table, and Google's distribution is as a result improved as well. So like now as time goes on, they both kind of realize, wait a minute, the other company kind of has us by the balls here. Like if they make a change, if Google just decides that they don't want to have their services on our product, the quality of the product is going to go way down. And in fact, this happened with Maps, right? They couldn't come to agreement. They're like, we're going to roll our own Maps. Well, the Maps experience was like really, really bad, like really bad, and like news-makingly bad. And of course, that was bad for Google because they lost, a huge amount of distribution and daily active usage as a result. This is what I think, Xerox Designer was getting at, which is the idea that on a long enough time horizon, companies just operate in their own self-interest and they really don't give a fuck about anybody else. They don't want dependencies and they want all the leverage. And so what he's saying is, if that's the kind of terminal state, then what are we doing here? Why? Like, why build it as a protocol at all? There's good examples to the contrary. The two that come to my mind are Visa and the NFL. SMTP is mentioned in the thread. Like, what about SMTP? That this is an example to the contrary. And Xerox Designer was like, well, yeah, but they weren't making Gmail. I think for many, there's probably an uncomfortable relationship between Warpcast and farcaster. Obviously, it's the same team making the same thing, so they're not really air gapped in a way that there's an even like a level playing field. Like I think that if you're a client developer, you are absolutely playing second fiddle to Warpcast. You don't know what's coming down. Like, so, but the thing is, like, no serious business wants to be or is even willing to be in that situation. So I think it's a very fair point, and I don't necessarily disagree. Now, the counter arguments would be, say, like what you're saying.
Hold on, I have a question.
Okay.
I have a question
I'll stop.
before you go into the counter arguments. Okay, farcaster is a protocol, right? It's a sufficiently decentralized protocol. So how do changes to the protocol get made? Is one question. Like, isn't that some sort of quote unquote governance? Even though I think Varun, I remember a couple weeks, months back at this point, has said if he had to rank the protocol itself on certain factors, and one of them was governance, he gave the lowest rating to. I think he was like, we need to improve governance. But in theory, there is a governance system in which the clients building on top of the protocol actually do have say in how they interact with the protocol, correct? And if you have eclipsed and are the top client, then in theory, you would have some sort of say in the protocol. That's where I'm getting confused, is like, this is why I think it was a very Web 2 mindset being applied to a Web 3 business. Is that actually how it would work? I don't know how that would work. And I don't know how FarCaster governance works. And I know that I just can't imagine a world in which like only the Merkle team is like making decisions about the FarCaster protocol, if down the road there's millions and millions and millions of users and like millions of clients and then millions of builders who are all thinking about the protocol. So anyways, that was just like my thinking, and that's why I'm getting confused, because it didn't feel like we brought that into the conversation at all.
So Varun has this thing that he says, which I love, which is he's like, running code and rough consensus. That's essentially the FarCaster governance model today. There's no voting, there's no consortium, it really is the Merkle team that's making essentially executive decisions. They are listening to feedback from people for sure. And they're soliciting feedback, like the channel stuff, which we can get into. There were multiple drafts of that were circulated. People gave their suggestions, thoughts, feedback. It was updated and so on. But I think that what they're optimizing for today, obviously, is execution speed, which is exactly the right thing, in my opinion. If you look at things like Linux or Bluetooth or USB or the W3C, like Web Standards Body, there absolutely are many participants, many stakeholders that decide, what's going to be in and what's not going to be in. Those things take years and years to just arrive in decisions that a small team can make in a short amount of time. So I think at a sufficient scale, yes, optimistically, you would say, yes, there will be many stakeholders and they'll all have a say. Pessimistically, look at Apple, say, with Lightning, like the Lightning connector. Like that is a proprietary connector. They do not share that. And only recently did they go to USB-C, and maybe even because of regulation was a factor there. So I think that the idea that a company may want to say, well, look, we're here to serve our own interests, and we really don't care that much about other businesses. Like we want to do what's best for us. I think that's absolutely just a fundamental reality of all businesses. And I think it's naive to pretend that that's just magically not going to happen. I think that the reason why it won't happen in the case of FarCaster would be wherein you have a very diverse client ecosystem and everybody kind of has equal leverage. It would just be bad. It would be obviously bad for everybody if there were numerous forks. Part of, I think, what's driving people's pessimism is that just doesn't exist. There really isn't any client diversity. There's certainly other clients, but the vast majority of usage is in Warpcast. So I think that's where imagine if you're Woj, right, and from Supercast, and he has his own things that he would like to be in the protocol, but let's say that those things are counter to Warpcast's interests. What would you put the probability of him getting what he wants? I would put it at near zero.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I agree with what you're saying too. Where I'm disappointed is that we all envision this future, which is really hard to envision. This read, write, own future in which users and humans have more ownership over what we're using than what we do with the traditional platforms that we're using today. And so you're talking about Lightning port versus USB-C. In a world in which users have more ownership and therefore more influence, I don't think Apple would, in their right minds, say, oh, we're going to use the Lightning port instead of the USB-C because users want the standardized version. What about what users want? In fact, what users want matters more than ever before. And so the kind of protocol versus client versus protocol is not it's making it a PvP about protocols and clients without taking into consideration what's actually best for users. And that is always what will win, in my opinion. Even if you think about going back to earlier, and this relates to FarCaster governance, David Furlong had to fight tooth and nail about the proposal to say no, followers should be on the protocol level. for a variety of reasons. Like they weren't going to be, and the Merkle team wasn't going to make it. And he said that. And then all of the users chimed in and was like, yeah, I want my followers to port over from one client to the next client. Like they should be on the protocol level. And because that's what users wanted, ultimately that's the way that the proposal turned into, and that's how it works today. Mm-hmm. And I think we're just going to see more and more of that happen. And so, for instance, like, why would a client fork the protocol if users actually really enjoy a lot of the benefits of the protocol for the most part? And if they have to redo the protocol in whatever way and they lose the benefits of the existing farcaster protocol, like I wouldn't continue to use that app. Like, I don't know. Well, that's like my take on it. And like, I just think it overlooked like, okay, what do users want?
Yeah.
And that to me was a miss.
I think that users don't know what they want. And I think that they don't actually care about any of this nerd shit. I think that the magical power of the farcaster protocol is that the work that you do in one client can be leveraged by another. But if there's a dominant client, like for example, let's just in my sci-fi example where I say, yeah, like X just like adopts the farcaster protocol. And that's where all the like the majority of the work is being done. All of the interactions, the engagement, the social graph is kind of emerging primarily, let's say, on X. Now it's being written to the network of hubs, but the vast majority of activity is happening inside, let's say, the X client. And X decides that it wants to, say, structure channels in just like a fundamentally different way than Warpcast. That it wants to put in, say, the curation and moderation. It wants to bake that in the protocol, or it wants to bake in some kind of economic model. And the Merkle team, the core team that's working on the farcaster protocol, they're just diametrically opposed. They're like, no, like we're just like against this. We don't want to do it. Well, in that situation, if you're the one that has all the users, you might say, well, okay, well, we'll just fork. We're going to just fork the protocol. We're going to extend it to the way we believe it should be. And because we have all the users, then that will be seen as canon. That will be seen as like the canonical network. And so the forked version, you even see this with like cryptocurrencies, like what's real Bitcoin? Is it Bitcoin or is it Bitcoin Cash? It's like these are like, this is like a fundamental issue. So I think like once you see a significant point of leverage emerge, meaning like someone gets all the usage, in this case, Warpcast, it really can misalign incentives between this ecosystem of developers. And I think like a lot of people feel that. I think a lot of indie developers do kind of feel like David's, in satellite of this big Goliath, which is Warpcast. Now that's just to contextualize that, all of this is so small. But technical people are kind of thinking through, okay, well, if I just play this game out, what's going to happen in 5 years? Because I'm going to make a long-term commitment. So they kind of have to think in this way.
Yeah.
Just to present the counter argument, though, that I would say, and I think it takes a special kind of founder and visionary to work against these forces. And I think that Dan and Varun are those founders. The examples that I like to give would be like the NFL and Visa, which is like in both of those cases. And the Acquired podcast has insanely good, very long form episodes on both of those. The bottom line is that they both had very visionary leaders who were able to convince many, many ecosystem participants to act against their own short-term interests in service of a larger vision that had them all benefiting much, much more than they otherwise would be. And they were successful. Mm-hmm. And I think like, I really do believe that like Dan and Varun like have that vision and they have that value system. And we even see that now with channels. They are creating opportunities for people like us, like Hypersub and like Automod and Party and anyone who's doing anything with like meme coins. I mean, they're creating all kinds of economic opportunities via the design of permissionless channels that they could easily, it would just be like shooting fish in a barrel. They could easily swallow these up and take them for themselves, and they're not. And I think that's a pattern, actually. There's been many opportunities that they could be like, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this. And they don't. They like leave it open for other people. In fact, Dan publishes these ideas and he's like, here, free ideas, please, people go and make this stuff. So I do think if anyone can do this, it's them. And and I believe they
Yes,
will, which is why
I
I'm so
agree.
bullish on Farcaster. And like, I can make this like pessimistic kind of against argument, but my personal belief is actually super optimistic. But I said this before, like, we have to live in reality. We have to be honest about what we see. And I think the fact of the matter is that like, there really isn't much client diversity. And, you know,
Yeah.
if you look at some of the things that people have done, like, it has been kind of picked up by Warpcast. And, you know, like,
Really?
if you look at what DF was working on prior to Frames, there's a lot of similarities. And
That's true, but I think that's like the only true one. Everything else kind of like already exists, like adapt or die in some ways.
yep.
I just think we should operate in a world of optimism and good faith. And maybe it's because I've been here or we've been here for so long that we have identified this pattern and we do trust Dan and Varun as leaders. It just bummed me out to also have that associated with FarCon.
Mm.
I guess I could like just say I took it personally because I was like, this has nothing to do with FarCon. I get it. If maybe you had a lot of these in-person conversations and that was a thread that you were hearing, I get that. But I don't think it is actually it has to do with FarCon that much because if you look and you see that client diversity panel or like the client panel where it's like Linda from Bounty Caster is distinct and different than anything else that is on the platform right now, I would say. Then you have David, and then you have Waj, and then you had one of the most talented teams in crypto, Dennis and the Mirror team, saying like, hey, we're putting a stake in the ground, we're completely pivoting our business, and we're going to build on Farcaster in a way that is very different than what you're seeing right now. For me, I was like, that I'm bullish about that. So people might want to talk about like, all of these other clients that look exactly the same. And like maybe I should have put up Dracula Alex up there because TikTok is a very, very different client too. It was a very pessimistic view. My question, and that I would pose to everyone, is like, what's the next step then? The next step is actually not like, oh, Merkle bad. It's like build more diverse clients. Like we need more people building more diverse clients. And if the answer is like, oh, people aren't doing that is because they're afraid of the protocol, then that's a different question. But I don't think that's why people aren't building more diverse clients. Like I have plenty of ideas. I can't fucking build them. Like if you want to build a diverse client that's different than a Twitter replica, come talk to me. Like I have plenty of ideas that I would be fun and that I would use. And so that was just like my only thing is like, what are the next steps? How can we solve this then?
So it's a couple of things. Like I'd say you're totally right. Like this is completely orthogonal to like FarCon the event. So to me, there's sort of two things here. There's like FarCon the event and FarCon kind of the culture. And so FarCon was both the events that took place, but it was also the conversations that happened at the lunches and dinners and breakfasts and everything else. And I think that's more so what he's referencing, which is like talking to a lot of developers, talking about the future of the network and clients and so on. And I think these were the things that kind of that people brought up. I think you're totally right. Like, okay, now what? What do we do with this information? What's the next step? And it is to create client diversity 100%. And I think the way to do that is to differentiate from Warpcast. Like the design space is really big. I think, to be honest, and don't get me wrong, like I just used the updated version of Nook last night and I really like it. I think they did a great job simplifying it and so on. And I feel like it's not enough. Like same thing with Supercast, also a great product, power user tool. It's great when Warpcast goes down. Like, but I want to see people do like super different things, like like a music player, you know, or like
Sonata. Have you seen that?
No, but I've heard of it. Like really more like just completely different things. We've been thinking a lot about this with Hypersub, which is like, okay, which pieces of the network make sense to use? The thing that I keep coming back to is the social graph. Like, I don't really give a shit about casts, to be honest. Or I think about casts maybe more as almost like a notification channel. It's a place for broadcast, but the way that we're thinking of it is really what you want is a social graph, and you want to broadcast. The way you want to kind of hack messages is as notification broadcasts. Which is not to say that you can't do all kinds of cool, new, interesting things that integrate Farcaster, but they are not themselves like a Warpcast client, you know?
Yes.
And so I think like, I just did an AMA today with Rev from Limitless, and he was asking me about NFTs, and he's like, why NFTs? And my answer was like, well, the NFT standard is really just a set of functions you need to have in a smart contract. But we've all been kind of like, we have this term that we use, which is a lunchbox term, which, quick story, there's a funny episode with Johnny Ive on this kids show that he used to watch when he was a kid. And they ask him, they say, how would you design a lunchbox? And he says, well, the first thing I would do is I'd stop calling it a lunchbox, because the term box kind of makes you think it should be a square, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's a cylinder. Maybe it's a sphere. Maybe it's some other completely different form. We talk about this a lot, this idea of like a lunchbox term, which is when you label something, it can sometimes trap your mind. It can like trap you into thinking about something a certain way. And I think we've all been like, when we think NFT, you think like, it's like a monkey JPEG.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's like, no. Like what it really means technically is that you have is a smart contract that has this set of functions, and that's it. Like, so it's actually this huge design space that's totally underexplored, because we all just think like, oh, NFT, I know what that means. And I think similarly, we're all trapped, like we're in these kind of like little conceptual prisons when we say farcaster client, and we all just think Warpcast, chronological feed of 320 character messages with notifications and replies and recasts and so on. And it's like, that's one form that it can take, but like the design space is just enormous. And so I think like, now counterpoint is, and this again is I think where people just need to be fucking more creative, which is, let's say that you want to do something and you need it to be in the protocol. And you go to Dan and you say, hey, I want to build this novel client, but I need these things. And they say, no, we're not going to do that. Now, this goes back to the way I kicked off this discussion, which is like dependency. So it's like, okay, well, why won't I just write my own thing then? Why won't I just make my own protocol? Because then I don't have these dependencies. If I want to have some novel interaction, why don't I just make it myself? Because in some ways you're very constrained by the infrastructure you choose to build on.
That's true.
That would be the counter argument.
I guess my counter argument is like, there's a lot of things in Warpcast that aren't on the protocol level right now. And most things. And so I'm like, well, just take like the minimum viable approach of what is on the protocol versus what isn't. And then if you make a really good proof of concept, like if you build a check-in app and you're like, this is really rich data, where your location is should be on the protocol level. Or like if you check in, that should be a protocol level thing. Make a proposal and get it approved, and you have like a full case of evidence for why that should happen. And that's ultimately what Warpcast is doing with like channels. They were like, we're not even going to add channels to the protocol until we prove it is something worthwhile. And I don't know why other clients shouldn't take the same approach. It's like, okay, if this is like everyone wins with a better protocol, then leverage what you can from the protocol, build out what you can't, make a proof of concept, build the case for support, and then propose it to be added to the protocol. And if people think it's a good idea. Okay, cool.
Yeah, this conversation sort of terminates in my mind is the point that you just made, which is like use Farcaster for what it's very good at today. And if you have more to add, then fucking add it in your client. Use your client as the canary in the coal mine. And if you demonstrate through performance in the real world that there's value to this being the protocol, great. Now you have some leverage, and now you can come to the table. Stepping back, what you could say is everyone's just galaxy braining it, and they're just overthinking it, and they're being like, but what about in this 10-year future where there's 1 billion users and I make my thing and I can't blah blah, and it's just like, like, okay, fair enough, you can kind of like play the 4D chess game and imagine how it's all going to play out, but like, don't galaxy brain it. Like left curve it and just be like, look, what does it give me today on day one right now? Well, what it gives me is a social graph. That's super valuable for bootstrapping any kind of network. So just valuable. Use that and don't overthink it,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I do feel like we are in a bubble in Farcaster, is that there's typically like always good vibes. And everyone laughed. It's like, this is like youth group. Like everyone loves
Christian rap.
Yeah. And I like that. I like Farcaster for that reason is like it always feels good. Like you can always find a pocket of optimism. It's the best part. And people are building and they're building through the bear and now they're building in the bull. And I think a lot of outside people aren't constantly surrounded by that type of positivity. And even just like listening to the boys club, feelings check-in most recently, like they were personally bummed. They were like, we're feeling like bummed right now. Like they were like, crypto just feels like super cringe and like all this other stuff. And I know OX Designer is very popular on crypto Twitter too. And it just coincided with a lot of crypto Twitter downer energy as well. And it was also posted on Twitter. And so it just made me think of that meme where it's like, in my own lane, like unbothered, moisturized, like blah, blah, blah. The only thing you can do about it is build. And
That's
so let's build.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That was a long but very worthwhile conversation. You helped explain it to me, so thank you. Other drama that might have unfolded, and this might not be worth talking about, so I'm going to ask you, is that apparently there's this guy, Jeff Goldberg, and then also Ghost Links that like had feuds with Dan. I don't know. Is this even worth getting up to speed on? Okay.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that like this is like an argument that's come up over and over, which is essentially that the founders are lying about the growth and they're being dishonest about it and they're not doing anything about it because it benefits them. I am like terminally on FarCaster. I'm on FarCaster all day, every day. I see it as core to our like marketing and distribution, and I just don't see it. Like if anything, I see the opposite. I see extreme candor, extreme honesty. Like they're regularly working on features to minimize spam, to create disincentives for it. The reality is very clear. Like I posted this at the hackathon at FarCon. I was like standing room only at the FarHack event. Like I'm bullish, you know, and it's like you just see hundreds of developers standing room only. Like, you're telling me that's fake, you know? Like, no, I'm sorry. I just don't buy it. Yes, it's not perfect. Yes, there's spam. Yes, there's low quality responses. You can do all kinds of like analysis and stuff on the network that you want, but it's just like, I don't know. I just don't see a lot of credence to the argument.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. You and I have even called it out, and we were like, I think this was the last podcast we recorded where we talked about like the retention and the churn numbers on Hypersub and then related it back to this whole new priority rollout of notifications where like we both were like, oh, like maybe 20% of my followers are like, like engaged.
I just think it's not going to go away. Spam is just it's a hard problem. I mean, Jesus, how long has email been around, right? And you still get spammy emails. Like a huge amount of the messages, the email messages sent in a given 24-hour slice of time are spam, you know? So it's like, it's just a hard problem. And I think that what I see is everyone being extremely honest about it and how to deal with it. So
We're not, no more energy goes that direction. Okay, then the next thing is, guys, funny story. Next topic is FTUX. I had to ask Johnny what this meant because I was like, is he trying to say like fucks in like a weird way? Like FUX? I was like, is this like an act? So Johnny, what is FTUX? And let's chat about it. So
FTUX, it's an industry term for first time UX. So it refers to the first time a user experiences the product. The analog to this with like physical products would be like an OOBE, OOBE, out of box experience.
Oh.
So, you know, you're just talking about like the experience of I heard about FarCaster, I download it, then what happens? So everything from creating an account, following users or unfollowing, like what do you see in your feed, just like the first sort of 5-minute period between installing the app and onboarding. And you actually posted about this. I think you quoted Shriram from Andreessen, and a couple people have talked about just the pain of creating an account now, and it's hard to get discovered. It's hard to find your people. Dan and Varun talked about this at FarCon, this notion of like really leaning into cozy corners, you know, and finding your people. I think that was central to the success of the early network, is that it's something I've said many times, in the Romergo rhythm we trust, right? Like Dan kind of handpicked certain people, hundreds of people, The just your quick kind of heuristic evaluation of what he could see from them on Twitter. And he was like, okay, you seem cool, you seem like you're not so cool. And so he kind of like curates this, what I think in retrospect will just look like the kind of DWR channel, which was just the entire network at the time. But this idea that you can cherry pick all these people, you can put them together, and something magical is going to happen. Is certainly the story of the early network, but it's no longer the case, in my opinion. If you create a new account, you're basically going to get hid immediately. I know we've both done this. It's not any better with my alt account. It's brutal. It's really, really hard to find people to connect with. And I think it's a problem. I think it's actually like a really big existential crisis for the network. I think that it's really important that they solve this. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
I agree. I was actually shocked to learn that there's still the auto-follow list. I think the auto-follow list is valuable, but I thought at this point they would have transitioned to like an interest-based auto-follow list, and I did not realize that they hadn't. And I can see how that's very off-putting for a lot of people, especially people coming over from crypto Twitter who already have their own concept of who's who and who's what's the term? KOL.
Oh God.
And for them to see like something different is like, what the fuck? Especially when like they don't opt into it. That to me is one thing that I do think needs to be fixed and should be a priority.
I was just going to say, I think that there is an interest-based follow graph. I think there's many auto follow lists actually. So you do go through a flow where it asks you to specify your interests, and then depending on what you pick, you're going to follow some people versus others. There's also, I think, a default list, which if you skip all of that, you'll still follow some auto lists. So I think it actually is what you're saying. Well, it's in addition to what you're saying.
Okay, that's fair. So that's one thing. And second, I do think, again, the power of Facebook and why Chamath is because they cracked like, oh, if you find 7 people, Facebook, like you'll retain as a user. I don't think this is unique to FarCaster. And so I will just give this example is I downloaded Orb as part of the Crypto the Game. I log into it and scroll through it because there's a lot of interesting artistic cultural content on there. And I think they do a lot of things well. It is impossible to find friends. And I obviously have a lot of people I know from FarCaster who I'm sure are also on Lens. It's really hard. And like that discoverability piece is really, really hard. But it would completely change the name of the game for me. Like if I could just easily find people on Lens that you interact with, then it's not unique to Warpcast, and to pretend that it is doing a disservice to Warpcast or any of the other clients. So that's just like my 2 cents is like there has to be a better way, and maybe it is importing, like go and use Airstack. Like I don't know why Warpcast isn't using Airstack. Like Airstack tells you which addresses you interact, like which addresses you have like much of the same interactions with, or like show the same NFTs that you're owning. The data that you can use is so rich. Like we have to fix this problem, and I get it's not a top priority for them, but you're gonna have a really hard time converting new users who don't have like grit and resilience to elbow their way to getting a power badge unless you do that. Is my 2 cents.
I agree. I think that's right. It's a really, really hard problem to solve, and it's a really, really important one to solve. And I am extremely sympathetic to someone who's got, I don't know, 1,000 followers or even 500 or 10,000, whatever they have on Twitter. They come to FarCaster, they auto-follow a bunch of people they don't know. And an example of this would be, there's a guy that I've known for probably, 15 years at least, maybe longer. And turns out he's the head of design at Royal Blouse Company. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that first of all, I can't believe he's in crypto. We worked together. Yeah. We had kind of like, we were like cross paths at Google. We're both from Southern California. And I don't know how I saw him. I think maybe I saw him on LinkedIn or something. It was like it popped up, and I was like, oh my God. And I was like, I wonder if he's on FarCaster. So sure enough, I look, he is, which blew me away. And then I look at his feed, and he's got probably like 10 or 15 casts. Not a single one had a like on it or a reply.
That's a problem.
And it was like a month, and like his last cast was like a month or so old. And I was like, I see what happened here. Like, he probably heard about Farcaster from Blau or someone at Royal. He onboards, he casts, just much the same way he would on Twitter. And he got zero engagement, literally zero, like nothing.
That has happened to multiple people I know that I tried to port over from crypto the game.
Yeah.
This should be a priority.
It's a big problem, because I would say he's like an extremely high value user. Like, he's had a long career. He's a great designer. He's done interesting things. He's at an interesting company. Like if he got engagement, he could be like a major contributor to the network. And instead he churned. It's funny because this is the literal opposite of why I joined FarCaster. It's like, I remember when I started Fabric, I was like, okay, I need to build a distribution channel. Even though I find social media to be super cringe, it's something that I have to do. So I'd gotten on FarCaster, and I was interacting there and interacting on Twitter. And Twitter was the black hole. It was literally like nothing from nobody. And
Same.
FarCaster was the opposite. I'm on FarCaster, and I've got Mark Andreessen like in my replies, and I'm like, okay, this is it. I am completely hooked. And I was like, not to pat myself on the back, but like, I've done an okay job, like with memes,
phenomenal,
and entertaining, and
phenomenal.
It's like, I would say that I add value to the network. And so the fact that there's all these people in the past couple months that could be similarly value additive but are churning out because their first time UX is just terrible, I think it's sad, and I think it's a big problem. I just think it's a really, really big existential problem that I hope they prioritize and fix, because if not, I don't know how. I think we're going to keep seeing the same thing, which is really good people churn out.
I think this should be a high priority too, because it's really hard to find people like us now, like who have zero Twitter. Like, if you don't have a Twitter right now and you're working in Web3, like at this point, everybody who's been working in crypto probably has a Twitter. And so I started Twitter the same year I started a FarCaster account, and like that's it. I think it's going to be hard to find people like us. Secondly, the biggest value add for a lot of people who are moving over is that they're finding that there's a lot more quality engagement on FarCaster. And so if you take away that as one of the key value propositions, like because someone comes and they're not getting any engagement, you're defeating the whole purpose of why I tell people to come to FarCaster. I was like, I would ask genuine questions, I'd get genuine replies. And so I think we need to solve this.
Yep.
And like by we, I mean the Merkle team, like I think we really need to solve this is because, again, even this guy who put out this whole tweet, shout out to Papa Raw, he basically was like, FarCaster feels like a Web3 tabloid magazine, blah, blah, blah. But on Twitter, I get high quality analysis, research, and thoughts from a bunch of brilliant folks in the arena. And then he goes, but one plus is there's high engagement. And I'm like, okay, imagine if it was easier for him to feel the high engagement part and then also get connected with the people who are providing high quality analysis. Anyways, we could go on and on about it. The one other thing I will say, we started late and we've been going. Me too. I was about to say, I have to go too. And I know we're going to cut this short. I think we should do a full episode on channels.
I agree. I was going to propose the exact same thing. I saw this on your list and I was like, this is like a whole episode in another.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. We can do a full episode on it because otherwise I'm like, we are late. Okay. Yeah. Is that the wrap? Is it the wrap?
I think yes. I think it is.
I think it needs to be.
Yeah, it does need to be. Do we want to do a quick feelings check-in at the end, or should we just call it?
My quick feelings check-in in one sentence is, this is the first time in 6 weeks where I feel like I have more than 1 inch, 1 centimeter to feel like myself. And now I actually feel good like myself, and that feels good. So how are you?
That's great. I'm so happy, especially seeing you the past few weeks and what you've been through. I've empathized and I've felt bad for you. So I'm so glad that you've had some time to recover and get back into being you. So yeah, I feel like I'm kind of heading into an opposite phase where I see, summer's coming, permissionless channels are coming, on-chain summer's coming. There's a lot of big opportunities for us. And I every day feel the excitement and the anxiety and the stress and just wanting to rise to the occasion. So I'm starting to realize like, okay, yeah, it's just going to be, we just need to grind and that's it. And that's what it is. So it's both exciting and stressful. You know, it's you know exactly what I'm describing. So, but I would say stepping back, it's net good, it's net positive, it's all growth. So I'm excited for summer. I'm excited to be recording again. I've missed our episodes, and yeah.
Well, as an outside perspective, you've risen to every occasion, and there's no reason you won't again. I have no doubt in my mind that the summer is going to be incredible for you. So
I'm excited.
Woo! Me too.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you guys.
Bye.